All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Want to welcome everybody to this month's Beyond Compliance webinar and podcast series. I'm Brian Sharp with SafetyChain Software, and we appreciate everybody who is coming into the room here, making time during your very, very busy days. Occasionally, we get an opportunity to shift gears a little bit on these the series, the education side. We get in some of the tactical stuff and strategy, but one of the things we hear that people enjoy the most are the stories, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to dig into a success story, customer here at SafetyChain, Chelan Fruit. We're going to talk about how they were able to implement food safety, compliance, and really improve productivity along the way with a paperless system. And the idea here is whether you're a SafetyChain customer, which some of you are, whether you're looking at SafetyChain, which some of you are, or maybe you're neither of those things. Our hope is always that you take some value away. So we really want to set the table there that this is not a SafetyChain demo and not intended to be. What we're really looking to do is showcase a customer who's done a wonderful job, been a great partner, and done something pretty special. And I think the hope is always that it gives you some insight into what can be done and how it can be done and some best practices. And it's always better to learn from those before you if you can, but also kind of show the path, right? What it could be. And I think this is a great example today. And I think we've got some relatable content that I think a lot of you will certainly be able to apply to your own businesses wherever you're at in the process. So with that, this series, if you're new to it, we certainly appreciate you joining us. These have been a lot of fun to build over the last couple of years. We've built this community around just sharing these ideas, these strategy, and the tactics, and we bring in experts and thought leaders. But our favorite really are to bring in the practitioners, the folks that are in the trenches doing this stuff, doing the work each and every day. So we appreciate you being here. We hope you enjoy it and take something away. And we always encourage you to share topics or even presenters that you'd like to hear more about. We bring these to you as a sponsor free of charge, and we hope you enjoy the content. You're going to hear a lot about this strategy and technology throughout our series. Today happens to be one of our customers, but again, we're not going to dive into the software itself. We're going to hopefully talk more about the outcomes and the process and considerations and things along those lines. But for those of you that are entertaining technology as we start to look and plan for next year, and you're looking for ways to improve productivity and throughput and yield or compliance, that is what we do as a cloud-based system end-to-end, helping you collect and manage and analyze all of that critical production data in your facilities. So we certainly welcome an opportunity to share more about what we're up to, and you'll get a brief snapshot of that through the story we'll share today. Few housekeeping things. So this is just going to be a conversation. The way that I like to do these is if we were all hanging around at a trade show and we were just chatting about something together. In this case, how a customer implemented our software. That's our intention here. So we did create slides, so there's some helpful takeaways. But the idea here is to make this professional, but informal and casual, and in a way that hopefully you'll enjoy the format. We will take some questions. Obviously, if there's anything that gets too into the weeds or too specific, we'll take those offline. We certainly promise to get to any we don't touch on during the course of the webinar. And if you'd want to share those after the webinar, we can connect with you then as well. But you'll notice that only the panelists are displayed, so you don't see any of the audience, and they won't see your questions directly either. So don't be shy. The idea is to hopefully touch on things that are relatable to you. And one of the common questions we get is if there's a recording. So yes, we'll be recording this, and we'll share the link. So if your colleagues weren't able to all pile into the room with you to watch this, you certainly can share it and watch it later on as well. And there are two ways to join on audio. We're on the GoToWebinar system, which many of you are familiar with, so you can dial in or you can use your computer audio. If you're having any issues, usually the first go-to move there is just to kind of do the little flip-flop. We do have Cheryl with me today behind the scenes. And so if you have any technical issues, feel free to use the chat box, and she'll do her best to help steer you in the right direction there. So with all of that, let's dig into the good stuff here. And as I mentioned earlier, we're joined today by a great customer partner of ours over at Chelan Fruit. And we have Robert Peebles on the line, who's the Director of Employee and Food Safety. a longtime industry veteran, and helped run the show there at what is the largest apple packing co-op in the U.S. They do an amazing amount of production there. So so first and foremost, Robert, I want to make sure you can hear me and want to welcome you to the conversation.
Thanks, Brian. Glad to be here. I can hear you just fine.
All right, perfect. That's always the first accomplishment there. Make sure we can all get on the system here. So, so first, thank you for being here, and you know, we appreciate the opportunity to share the story. You guys have done something pretty special up there, and are continuing to do more. I thought this is a great check-in point. As I was hearing things in the office about what you were able to do, you also happen to be a fan favorite of some of our services teams. So, but with that, you know, just in talking about Chelan Fruit, maybe you can give us a little bit of a sense of a little bit about the company and where you work, what your role is there.
Sure. So I'm responsible for the employee safety department, food safety, sanitation, among a couple other compliance type areas. Chelan Fruit's in the middle of Washington State. We have member owners from the Canadian border down to the Oregon border and all points in between. We pack apples at 3 different facilities, pears at a 4th facility, and then we have 2 different cherry packing facilities. And then we do just a little bit of plums and pluots also.
Awesome. So you get got a lot of things moving in a lot of different places there. And in terms of just for setting the table so everybody is understanding the context here, one of the things that you guys are also in terms of SQF, what was used to be referred to as level 3, correct?
Correct. In the warehouses, the SQF program.
Got it. Perfect. Okay, good. That helps give some guidance there. And for those of you that may not be familiar with them, we just have a picture of some of the different products here that they're packaging and up there. So, and I think, as you said, you're over a course of 6 different facilities. How many are there? How many different brands are there total that you guys end up packing under?
That's a great question. I couldn't begin to tell you how many different labels we pack under. You know, obviously all the retail specific labels. We have our own labels. It's dozens.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's what I figured. I knew it was a lot, which provides a lot of complexity in and of itself. So, so let's start there. I think one of the things that's helpful for people to hear is kind of where this journey starts, and you know, for everybody, it's a little bit different. I think in getting a chance to know you and learning more about the process you've been on, your core challenges were really just around the paper. I think the paper was a challenge for your team. It was driving you crazy, and that was kind of the beginnings of this. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what started the process to consider technology and what challenges you guys were facing internally that were driving that conversation?
Sure. I started my time at Chelan Fruit working with growers implementing the Global Gap program 10 years ago, and that was a paper-based program for me, and it took hours, and it was very frustrating for me. Worked with our IT department, came up with a fairly simple solution to go paperless on that, and when I took over the food safety department in the warehouse, we were still doing paper at that time for virtually everything, especially when it came to food safety. And we could not develop a system in-house that would function adequately or well. So we began the process 4 or 5 years ago of looking around, trying to figure out what could some of the solutions be. And in looking at how much time one of my team members spent just driving around picking up paperwork and then coming back and then filing it, you know, it was obvious we had to come up with a better solution. We were looking also at all the issues that we would find months or weeks later that were documented well in paperwork that we didn't know about, wanted to know about as soon as it would happen. And obviously, as everybody else is going through with the Food Safety Modernization Act being passed in 2011 and now required for most of us, we needed to have a better system in place than scrambling around trying to find pieces of paper that may or may not have been coffee stained and partially destroyed. So those were certainly my frustrations, was watching my teammate drive around and all the time wasted, having all these little surprises that seem to pop up in audits. We were looking at hundreds of pieces of paper throughout our system every week. So we needed to simplify that as much as we could.
Just needed a better way. Yeah, and you bring up a great point about how everybody is dealing with such complex environments. You literally were having to drive to these different places to go get paperwork, to bring it back and drop it into what you describe as a pretty inefficient process, right? Like you physically were driving to these different locations.
Correct. We would drive to locations and have to, go on a hunt at times for paperwork that we knew was out there,
Right.
but the mechanics couldn't remember where they put it or the supervisors weren't sure where it was at. And so we would spend a lot of time looking for documents, and
Right.
just not a very successful way to run a food safety program.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you make another point too, that you mentioned, you had this good data, right? And then you just can't get to it sometimes. So it's not always that you can't get the information on the paper. It's just what happens after that process. And I think a lot of people can relate to that for sure. So you have an interesting background because the Global Gap project that you were part of. So you had some success going through this. So you probably had a little bit of a running start or an advantage in terms of how to prepare this group for this transformation, if you will. So but we see this a lot, Robert. People kind of are facing the same challenge you did. They get excited and then they get stuck, right? How do we actually start? What do we need to be thinking about? How do we get others on board? I think that's something that you guys did a really good job of, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit about it because you were dealing with this co-op board, you're dealing with multiple stakeholders inside the company, you're dealing with all these external facility and locations. So can you just talk a little bit about what the baby steps you took before the project to kind of get prepared?
Sure. So I was the one that was leading this charge, and so began the process of trying to find some different vendors that would offer this, and went to our IT department and worked with them quite a bit on it. They wanted something that they weren't going to have to babysit and take care of. And we looked at a few programs that were going to require, they were cheap, they were inexpensive, and they were grossly inefficient and would require our IT department to spend a lot of time managing and babysitting. So one of the criteria was going to be that it could not be something that our IT department had to run and not have other people run it. And in talking with our QC program, our quality control group, they were doing most everything on paper, a little bit electronic, but they wanted something that would be tablet-based, that would give them freedom to move around and do their job away from a computer. So we started that exploration process, and the cooperative board, we had to, as a group, go and make a pitch to them. Our general manager at the time would admit that, technology stopped for him with the rotary phone. He didn't really have a good grasp of what technology could do today. And, I'm adamant it's there to make our lives better and easier and more efficient. So he did not want to lead the charge with the board. So he asked us to come in and make the pitch to the board. And for those that work at co-ops, you never know what's going to happen when you get in front of the board. Sometimes it'll be 3 hours of discussion. Sometimes it'll be 30 seconds. It was a few minutes of discussion, but they wanted to make sure that it wasn't just going to be a food safety program. They wanted to make sure that they were going to get more bang for their buck. And so we did talk to them about the QC program that we are implementing right now. And, some of the other efficiencies that we felt we could get out of it that wasn't going to only be about food safety.
Right. And I appreciate you sharing that story because I think a lot of people can relate to it. It's also where they get stuck. It's not a natural part of the job to lead this type of stuff. And what I wanted to point out for everybody, what you said is so critical in what you said about that it couldn't just be a food safety program, and that I think what you shared with me when we were talking earlier was that you had to show this value, right? And that value came from getting QC involved with something they were already doing and making sure IT knew this wasn't a heavy lift for them. So there was some ROI, there's some time savings, but there was also kind of the trust that this wasn't going to be a distraction or a real pain for anybody. So I think that's an important part, that there's a lot of technology that can help, but just turning it on isn't always the solution. And you pointed out another mistake we often see. You talked about kind of the cheaper solutions. They maybe do one piece and it's cheap, but it creates a longer term issue. How did you kind of vet that out? Was it just by kind of asking the right questions, or what recommendation would you give there? Or did you demo it, or did it just not fit the criteria you had set out for?
Yep. So it was a demo, but it was also just establishing some criteria beforehand, and it was obvious, looking at our criteria, watching the demos, who would rise to the top. And the ones that took a lot of time from our IT department, or gave the appearance that our IT department would have to spend a lot of time with it, they quickly dropped out of the race.
Very good. No IT babysitting. That's good. That should be a good tagline here. I'm sure your IT department appreciates that. So,
yes, they do.
It makes you, put you in good graces with them, which is always a helpful ally to have. As I mentioned, I think you did a wonderful job kind of preparing for success. And I think the result is, not only did you have a fast implementation with a very small team, and by that it was kind of you and a couple of your key folks, but you really saw quick results. And so one of the things, and I know you're a pretty humble guy, but I think you did some really important things that others can learn from and benefit from. And I just want to talk through a few of those that we see as common amongst our most successful customers. And some of this was the prep work ahead. I would like you to talk about in particular about standardization and kind of thinking through those workflows. Can you talk a little bit about what that process was like and how it helped you?
Sure. So Chelan Fruit, we're a merger of many different cooperatives. And the last couple mergers, they brought their food safety programs with them. So we were managing them all through one department, but they were all numbered differently. They were all identified differently, asked for different information. So a few years ago, we actually went through and standardized all the paperwork at one time over a summer, so that everybody was at least the same, which helped the implementation out a lot when it came to SafetyChain, because we were able to take that same methodology, make everything virtually the same for each facility, or similar enough that if somebody had to move from one facility to another, that it wasn't a re-education process or a relearning. They could pick it up and answer the few unique questions for a facility easily. So that was a big help, just sitting down and plotting it out and making sure that the information we were asking for was necessary for all the different facilities. And our IT director, who I actually spent quite a bit of time with through the years, always preached to me that hours on the back end saves days on the front end. So there were things that we did in these forms that did take quite a bit of time on the back end. Nobody on the front end knows the time that went into making it a user-friendly program, but they certainly appreciate it because it does make it easy on them.
Right. No, that's good. And I love the hours on the back end saving days on the front end, and there's a lot of truth in that. And whether that's the standardization, thinking through these workflows, it really does make a difference, so you don't have to go back and reset. And I think there's one thing too, actually, before I jump to the next slide there, as you're thinking through that and doing that planning, not only is it standardization, it's optimization, right? So you guys were also thinking about better ways to do your workflow, not just transforming what you used to do on paper into SafetyChain. Is that right? You had an opportunity to kind of improve some things you'd wanted to do?
Yes. Yeah, we were able to improve what we were doing out there and improve the information that we were getting on the forms themselves.
Yeah, that's good. And we'll hear that, that when you make that shift from paper to technology, they'll often ask themselves, why are we asking all of these? Do we really need all of this? Or did we realize we could take these three forms down into one? Or as long as we're getting the data, right, the output at this level, then we can simplify how we capture it. The other part of this is the people, which is so critical, right? Because we all talk about technology, and that's important and has to do all the heavy lifting for you. But I think the way you approached this with your team was very smart and very productive. Can you talk a little bit about, I think you had, there was two people you said early on became kind of champions and change agents internally that were well respected, and you really got them involved. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened and how those folks helped you get this rolled out so quickly?
Sure. So our sanitation manager and our food safety warehouse representative are both bilingual, and the paperwork that we were generating touched them a lot. And it was a source of frustration for the two of them. Paperwork being destroyed by water during our sanitation process, or paper being lost, etc. So when we talked about this, they were very excited to be able to start getting rid of paper. And our sanitation crews were very excited because they felt like they were being brought into the fold more, that they were being able to participate more, because we were soliciting a lot of information from them about how things were working and what they would need. So that was a big pull for them. And when we rolled this out and had Val from SafetyChain and a couple other folks come up, they were there for the initial implementation meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of that meeting, those two individuals had really taken over the bringing folks in, educating them. I think 75 or 80% of our workforce is monolingual Spanish. Mm-hmm. So having those two individuals bilingual and being able to get in and talk with those folks in their native language was key. And they were very excited, and you could see on their faces, you know, they bought into this. This was a big deal to them, and so they were very happy to participate and be part of the team. So it was a good experience for everyone.
Yeah, it is so critical, and we hear that a lot with the most successful and the fastest, by the way, implementations is when everyone feels bought in. And you mentioned, you know, they got excited, and I want to give you guys credit on the second point here about taking ownership of the system. If I remember correctly, they were actually like building forms and fully running the system by the time our team had left your building. So they were kind of the go-to people as well, technically, right?
Yep, we'd work together on the forms. We would sit in the meetings, and you know, when we were doing our trainings, if there was something wrong with the form, then we were able to just implement that change right then and there. And when rolling it out the next day, just going back out on the line, it was a very straightforward, simplified process.
That's great. Great to hear. The last piece I think it was good. You did mention there is a key role for IT where you do want to leverage them was around hardware. Any quick thoughts around that?
Yeah, they did the research trying to figure out what tablets we needed and made sure that they were able to source enough. I think we bought 60 tablets. I think the price was $150 or $120 a piece, and that was almost a year ago. I think we have 59 still in operation. So
hey, that's
59 out of 60 for me isn't bad.
That's great. Very, very good. And our experience is the same, Robert, that they do want to be part of that. And I think leveraging their expertise in the right places, not necessarily managing the software, but the infrastructure around it, the Wi-Fi, the hardware, is really, really critical, because you can get a whole lot of momentum going and then go, oh my gosh, you know, we don't have the right stuff to actually put this into practice. So so that is a good spot for those of you thinking about when and where to get your IT involved. So let's shift a little bit now. We talked about kind of what you faced and how you went through the project and some ways that I think really helped make this successful. And we're still growing together, but I think there's been some really great early success that we can share. And we start talking about some of the key benefits out of the gate. You shared a story with me that really, really struck me, because I think it's a great example of it doesn't matter what industry you're in or how big a company you are or how small you are, on why you do technology. It's not just to get off paper. It's what you then do with that extra time or those resources. So there was definitely some time savings, and it was really fascinating how you've used that. And then also kind of something you've seen I haven't heard described the way you did with employee engagement. So I'd like you to, if you don't mind, talk through a couple of those things there that's been beneficial thus far.
Sure. So we had obviously a paper document for our GMP and safety walkthroughs that we would do. Then we'd have two people each do one a month for each facility. And it was a fairly long, laborious process. And now we've taken that, we've broken it up into smaller pieces and asking for a little more detail in each section of our facility. But for the most part, they're out. If it's not one section a day, it's one section every other day in a week. They're out there on the line a lot more frequently than they ever had been in the past. They're seen on a regular basis, and being seen drives that awareness. That awareness drives change. So that's been a great thing to see. And they're not spending time, head down trying to find that piece of paper or that one document or trying to remember something. Right. So that they could write it down on their piece of paper that they may or may not have forgotten. And, I talk about now we went from multiple pieces of paper. They just have one piece of paper. It's their tablet. It's got everything in there that they need.
Right.
And our supervisor was taking, many minutes a day going through and signing up on all their documentation. That doesn't happen anymore. It's a fairly quick process. And those that are showing some kind of an error, they are quickly able to go through and review those. And if there's anything that needs to be acted on, it's acted on almost immediately, as opposed to waiting for weeks or a month or two. Right. So we know that our data is a lot more accurate than it used to be because forms can't be completed unless they've filled out those pieces that we say are required.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Yeah, can't skip those boxes. It's a simple but super critical point there. And just going back to your first one, what I loved about that is a lot of people. So yeah, the values and time savings, and there's an ROI there, but it's then what you do with that time savings, right? It's not about getting rid of people. Most of you guys don't have enough people, so the impact you're making that helps continuous improvement, spot issues before they happen, or like you said, being able to act in real time is massively valuable and important to note. You also mentioned that process, right? It was once a month. It was very tedious and laborious, and then you shared with me a little bit about just how they're enjoying. Maybe I don't know if "enjoy" is the right word, but they're much more engaged now in these walkthroughs because it's different than it used to be. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the feedback you're getting from your team who are actually out on the floor? And you talked about their engagement being at a different level.
Yeah, that just constant presence out there. They're getting to know people more, and they've appreciated that instead of looking at a 4-hour walkthrough, that it may only be a 20-minute walkthrough or a 30-minute walkthrough. They're just going to walk through our segregation room because they just don't have time to do the whole thing. So they're able to fit those small pieces into their day a lot easier, makes their lives a little less complicated and more enjoyable to be at work. So
yeah, no, very, very good. So you've already talked a little bit about the paperwork, right? There's when you go paperless, obviously, that's the goal here. And so you've seen a big reduction in the physical paperwork processes. And you talked a little bit about spotting the problems in more real time versus days or weeks later. And you also mentioned to me once that I think is important that a lot of people can relate to. Sometimes those delays aren't also just because of paper, it's because of people, right? Turnover and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the challenges you've had there with maybe losing data or the delays just because of that, and maybe how this has changed now for you?
Yeah, so now we've got the ability to see what's going on near real time, and I don't have it perfect yet, but we are able to see when all of a sudden something stops being used. It's showing up regularly and then it just drops away. A lot of times it's because we had a change in an employee and the new employee didn't know that they were supposed to do a particular thing, so we're able to pick on that a lot faster. We just rolled out the QC program here recently, and that's been interesting because everybody knew that we were having some issues of fruit that got into a box, but now it's right there in front of them, and they're not waiting for that piece of paper to be completed that told them they had a problem going into the box. It's right there in front of them very, very rapidly. and we're seeing a big impact. I think we started that 2 or 3 weeks ago, but we're starting to see that impact right now. It's been a big positive for us.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah, and it'll be good to see what the measurement of those results are as you start, you don't have any recalls or you're spotting those issues earlier in the production process. You mentioned something I think that's important to share, and if you're willing to kind of talk through this a little bit, there's also this transition too where um, you don't know what you don't know, and once you have the system, all of a sudden you kind of knew it all, which could be almost a bit overwhelming, and then you work through that. But could you talk a little bit about that? That maybe it was that realization that, oh my gosh, maybe we're not as dialed in as we thought as much as we thought we were, in the system kind of helping guide you to where to make those improvements.
Definitely, and that's something that I knew was going to happen. I knew we weren't as good as we thought we were, but when we started this program and rolled it out, to see it right there in front of you, it is a bit of a shock, and you do kind of take a step back, and then you got to reevaluate and move on. But yeah, that was a big shock to the system, and it's not that we were doing anything horribly bad. It just was
Yeah,
interesting to see it there in full color right in front of you, and
right.
not knowing that people were doing things probably gives you a little bit of a false sense of security. Now that
Mhm.
it's right in front of you, you know they're not doing it. You're going to have to react to it.
Right. It removes some of those guesses or gut feelings that you have, which, it's always good to trust your gut, but when you can validate it with the data, put it right in front of you and actionable, that's great. I think you make a good point, right? It's not that people have bad processes or they're making tons of mistakes. It's just the time it takes to identify those and improve them. Sometimes is where the real value can come. One last thing I wanted to ask you too, Robert, you mentioned the challenge of the workforce that you have. I think a lot of people can relate to that. And sometimes there's assumptions made about technology that, oh, on the floor they maybe don't have the education levels or the experience with it or whatever it might be. And everybody's hesitant. I'm sure there was some hesitation in your organization, and now they've come all the way to the other end where they're saying, I hope we never go back. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what the fears were, and maybe how they talk and think about 60 tablets floating around the facilities now?
Yeah, I think for a lot of our supervisors, they're given this tablet. It's a computer. They don't want to break it. They're afraid that they're going to do something wrong. Uh,
Mhm.
and so once they got into it, started using these tablets, and you can't break them, or if you break them, it's okay. We
Mhm.
have extras. You can't destroy the program. It's a one-way flow of information. You just, instead of writing it on a piece of paper, you're now punching it into a tablet.
Mhm.
And it took a few days uh, going through it, seeing what worked, what didn't, the learning process in the beginning. But after really they were implementing it easily within a few days, maybe a week.
Wow,
And
that's great.
our food safety representative was out talking with them, and many of them have just made the comment that they really hope we never go back, because they don't want to go back to having all those pieces of paper and it's being lost everywhere. It's made their lives a
Yeah,
lot easier. And, that technology hurdle is just a mental hurdle. Once they got
mhm,
over that, it was very easy to implement. And
that's great. And I hope that's encouraging for people to hear, because it's a very real pushback or concern that we want to be sensitive to, but it's also easily overcome once they understand how user friendly it is. And I think you had even made the point, it makes sense. They're using their phones, their kids are using tablets at home, and now we're using them to run our business, and it's a natural progression there. So this has been really, really helpful. I think one of the things, if you'll oblige me, I always like to ask when I get guys like you who've been doing this a while, you've had some great success. It's just kind of some nuggets, some learnings, right? As you've gone through this, there's probably people who are listening now that are kind of where you were in the beginning, or they're not sure where to start. And so just curious if you can share a couple of things looking back now that you feel like you've learned from this process, and as you continue to move forward and add new things like you are.
Sure. Yeah, I think it was you know, for us, we needed to get up and running rapidly. That was kind of one of the mandates from our general manager and the board, was that if we were going to implement this, then they had an expectation it was going to be done rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
So we did a lot of forms and started to roll it out. It worked. I think a better system, in looking back, I would have taken 2 or 3 at the most,
Mm-hmm.
and put a lot of energy and effort into those and implemented it a little bit more slowly. Just because some of those forms can get so complex, and we've
Mm-hmm.
gone back and made some changes that if we had just slowed down a little bit and focused our efforts on just 2 or 3 forms right out of the gate, we probably would have figured that out a little more quickly. No harm, no foul. The system still works. But for individual frustrations, I would suggest just take a few, really focus in on those, and get those dialed in. And then those people that are using it become your advocates out in the warehouse, and that makes it easier to implement more.
That's great.
And certainly don't go at it alone. We talked with QC, we talked with our IT department, we talked with our field staff, we talked with a lot of different people that directly or indirectly would be touched by this program, and made sure that they all had a seat at the table and were able to provide their input and
get behind it.
Yeah.
And then
it was go ahead.
No, that's great. I appreciate it. I think your bite-sized approach, no pun intended there, to the beginning is great feedback, because I think we have kind of a joke we hear time to time. People go from not really sure if they want to do anything, and so they'll go from wanting to walk to flying a spaceship, right? And so you kind of got to teach them to ride the tricycle and then the bike, and so they get really excited, I think, is sometimes what people don't foresee, that you go from evaluating technology to wanting to do it all. And once you open up the box, like, oh my gosh, look at all the things it can do. So I think those are great input, and then getting everybody else on board. On the last part about choosing a technology partner, I think you covered one half of this earlier, right? Which is making sure it can do what you need it to do, and going through a thorough evaluation. And then working with them, what were some things that were important or helpful from our side to make sure our partnership was equal, and that we were supporting you the right way that others should be thinking about?
Yeah, one of the points that was made early in the process from SafetyChain was that they're not here to tell us how to do our business. They're here to learn how we do our business and how this is going to implement into our current practices. So that was important. We didn't want to have to relearn everything out there so that we could take a program off the shelf and then make our business fit it. The program that we got needed to fit our business. And so, through the process of asking lots of questions, and, I don't speak technology all the time. So, I needed somebody that could slow it down a little bit, dumb it down for me, and, repeat themselves 2, 3, or 5 times if necessary, and just be a partner in the whole process, and learn what you do so that they can do what they do better.
That's great, and I think it is. We do learn a lot, and it's what kind of makes this a lot of fun, and it is important because each of you runs so differently, and then even within an organization, each plant can be such a different business operation. So it is important, and it's what makes this both a challenging and fun industry to work in for sure. So we appreciate that. You've been a great partner, and you've done a wonderful job. It's great to hear the early returns already on the QC thing. So that's exciting. So hopefully maybe we'll have a follow-up next year to hear how that side of the house is going. But I really do appreciate you being willing to share your story. I think there's a lot of stuff in here that is beneficial for your peers to hear, whether they're working with SafetyChain or not. This is just good old-fashioned solid best practices as you implement technology. So Robert, thank you so much. We really do appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. It's been an enjoyable process. And I can't say that about every technology rollout that we've had at our company. So that's a big plus.
Yeah, thanks. We appreciate that. You've been a good partner. We're looking forward to doing a lot more. And for those of you that want to dig in a little bit more with your questions on how this would apply to your business, we'll certainly be happy to follow up with you afterward and can take you through a quick demo and start that conversation and welcome that opportunity. So again, Robert, thank you to you and to your great team out there. And thanks everybody else for making some time today to join us. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Thank you.